If there's one feature that made me fall in love with ClickUp, it's the automation capabilities. I've tried a bunch of project management software, and I was a project manager myself in the past, so I've realized that one of the biggest flaws is that there's a lot of information to fill in, and let's be honest, not everybody fills up all the necessary infos. They don't fill up the assignee, they don't add comments based on certain alerts, and for your reports and your dashboard to work properly in a project software, you need all of the data, all of that information to be filled in. And that's where automations come in. Automations in ClickUp let you create rules that will be triggered by some events and create an action that will actually take care of handling the right action for you, so that you don't have to worry about reassigning a task based on a certain status or having an urgent alert being triggered when a task is overdue, etc., etc. In this video, I'm going to show you 7 ClickUp automations that are going to speed up your workflow, and I can guarantee you that you're going to apply some of them into your workspace. And stay till the end because I'm going to ramp up on the level of the automations, and I'm pretty sure the last ones and the bonus one are going to save you a lot of time and just take care of cleaning out and organizing the ClickUp workspace for you. I'm Ramzi, I'm a ClickUp verified consultant, and welcome to this video on ClickUp Automations. Now let's start with some beginner automations, and we're going to start with an automation that I feel every workspace should have. It's an automation that lets you resolve the parent task when the subtasks are done, so that I don't have to worry about closing a task if the subtasks all have been resolved. So I can show you exactly how it looks like in ClickUp. So I'm in a space called Tech, and I'm going to go into my list called Roadmap. I'm going to say, for example, create welcome screen. I'm going to add a bunch of subtasks. So I'll just add 2 or 3 subtasks like create login, set up profile, and add welcome text. So these are just actions that you need to execute to get create welcome screen done. So logically, if you close all of those and move them to the right status, they should all close the welcome screen because everything's resolved, so it's done. And you will have to do that one click of closing this, but you can save yourself time by automating this in ClickUp. Let's get into the tech space, and I'm actually going to create that automation at this level, so it applies at every level below. Every time you create an automation, you have to think about it. Where do I want to create this automation? Does it make sense to be applied only to a certain list, a certain folder, or just to everything that's within that space? That's the highest level where you can create an automation, by the way. You cannot create an automation in the everything view at the everything level. You will have to pick a space, but you can always duplicate this automation across different spaces. So let's start off with this one. First off, we're going to understand how the automation screen looks like. So on the left side, we have the event that triggers the action. And here we have the action that happens when that event happens. So basically, if it were a sentence, this would mean when a task or subtask is created, then set a custom field to a certain status. But ClickUp offers a bunch of actions. You could say change the assignee to a certain person, add to a certain list, move to list, etc. I'm going to show you some of those across the 7 automations we're going to see. Let's start with this one, and I'm just going to paste the name right here and say when subtasks are resolved, then resolve parent task. There's actually a trigger that triggers whenever all immediate subtasks are resolved. That's the one we want to use. And when this happens, what we want is that the status of the parent task goes to closed. That's it. Our automation is done. This is a very simple one, as I said. And to me, it's an automation that every workspace should have. For some specific lists, you want to monitor that, and you want to make sure that if all the subtasks are resolved, you still have a look and you close it yourself. So it really depends on how you want to be able to have control over it, or how you want ClickUp to take care of it for you. So I'll click create right here, and our first automation is done. So what it means is that when all subtasks are resolved, our parent task is resolved, and that should be it. Let's give it a try and see if it works. I'm going to get back into my roadmap list right here and create a goodbye screen, for example, and maybe I can add a close button and add a goodbye text. So these are random tasks just to show you the example. I'm going to close both these tasks, so I'll move them to closed. And then what should happen is that this one will be turned to closed. So as you can see, as I was speaking, ClickUp understood that all the subtasks are closed, so the parent task should be closed as well. Now that's our first automation working. And if we open that up, we can see that ClickBot did something in the activity here on the right panel. And that means that an automation was actually triggered. If you see ClickBot in your activity, it means it was an automation. And you can actually click there and see the actual automation that made it happen. And if we go into activity, we can also see all the automations across all the workspace that happened. So you can monitor and see the successful, but also the failed automation and understand why they failed. In my case, I don't have any failures, or see the automations that happened on a certain date. So this activity in the automation screen lets you really monitor and overview all the automations going on. As you can see, there's quite a lot going on in my workspace. Now let's move on to the second beginner automation. And this one says, when a task changes to review, then please reassign it to its creator. This is a pretty useful automation because you might be in the case where you're having ClickUp as a ticketing system, as a bug reporting system, and you want that each time someone reports a bug, whenever the bug is in review, it's actually reassigned to them because they're the one reporting it. So that's why we're going to create it in the bugs list in this case. We're not going to create it at the everything level. I just want to test it out and create it right here. I'm going to show you exactly how we want the automation to run. So if we have a bug on the screen, for example, in this task, we can display the created by field and say we want Lucas to actually be handling the task. And as soon as Lucas has handled it and has moved it to review, we want it to be reassigned to me because I'm the creator. Now, you could do that manually, and whenever Lucas has moved it to review, he can just change the assignee to me and remove himself, but that's quite tedious. You can imagine that if you have 10, 100, 1,000 tasks, you're gonna waste your time doing all these clicks, and you can save yourself a few minutes every day from this with an automation. So let's see how it looks. I'm gonna put Lucas back, and I'm gonna reopen this task and go back into automations here in the top right. So what I'll say is, as soon as a status is actually changed to review, if we go to advanced, remove the actual assignee, so Lucas in this case, and add the task creator as the new assignee. I can actually just paste the name right here. When the task changes to review, reassign to creator, and click create. And that is it. I have my second automation. Setting up ClickUp automations is pretty straightforward once you have thought them through before, and you need a little bit of experience to ramp up on how it works. But you can just copy and paste some of my automations. These are pretty handy in a lot of cases. So you have to first think, will this apply in some specific cases? And if so, create them in the right lists or folder or spaces. So let's test this one out. I'm actually in this task. I'll open it up, and let's say I'm Lucas. I've moved forward, it's done. I can put it to review. So what should happen is that ClickUp will know that this task is in review now, and they'll say, who's the creator? Oh, it was Ramzi, so let's assign it to them. And that's what just happened right now with ClickBot reassigning the task to Ramzi. And that is it for beginner automations, and that shows you just the very basics of what ClickUp automations can do. But we can go a level up with more advanced automations. Let's go with these three automations. We're going to start with a third one. When a task is created, then apply a template and set the due date to next week. We want that each time there's a new bug, for example, it's handled within a week and it's an urgency. It actually takes care of applying the bug template that I'm going to show you right now. So let's get back to ClickUp. It's a little bit the same principle. We're going to understand how our automation works so we can create our bug template, and then we're going to set it up in the automation area. So first off, let's create our bug template. I'll click add a task and call it bug task template. I'll just open it up, and the only thing we're going to change is the description. And I'm actually going to ask ClickUp AI to write short bug report template. And once it's done, ClickUp should take care of it. So ClickUp AI is pretty handy in these cases when you want to create very specific templates or some placeholders, or just repurpose existing content. And I'll just clean out whatever ClickUp AI did. I'll just strip it down to the essential. Maybe I want the steps to reproduce the bug, the result, the actual result, and maybe the environment that was used. And that way, each time a bug is created, if this doesn't have this information, you can tell the person, hey, Diane, please fill in the bug information before we can handle it. So we have that template. We can just right click here, go into templates and save as template. And I'll call it task bug report. So that way I can reuse it in my automation right now. So we're going to go into the automations here on the top right and click add automation. And we're going to pick our trigger when a task is created. It's actually created by default. And this time we're going to change the actual application. So you can choose your automations to apply on tasks, on subtasks, or on both. So before you create any automation, ask yourself, do I want this to apply on every single task? Because maybe for some subtasks, you actually don't want this bug automation to be triggered. It doesn't make sense for a bug to have a subtask with a bug, etc., etc. So in this case, we're going to only apply it to our tasks. And then as an action, we're going to pick apply template. And I'll pick my template and pick the one called bug. It's bug report, this one, and click use template. And I'm just going to paste the automation name. And if you remember, we also have to set the due date to 1 week after. ClickUp Automations lets you create successive actions that happen one after the other. You don't necessarily have to have only one action on a trigger. You can choose to apply a template, but also change the due date. That's where it becomes interesting, because if we set these consecutive actions, we can really create a solid workflow of actions that happens based on certain trigger. So it's up to your imagination. It's up to how you work together. First, you have to think, what do I want ClickUp to do for me? And then you can apply this in ClickUp Automations. So I'll pick the due date 2 days after a trigger date, and I'll pick 7 days. So that means with the 22nd of November, if this task is created, the due date will be set to the 29th of November. So I'll click create. If we get here and I create a new task here in the bug list, for example, the button doesn't work, I'll just delete my template task. We don't need it anymore. Let's see what happens. So the due date is set to the 29th of November. That's what we wanted. And if I open up that task, we have the actual template applied right here. So you can just fill it up with the right information, and this saves us tons of time from just applying the templates one by one. So you can see the power of ClickUp Automations and what you can do just to save yourself a few clicks, a few sets up every day, just to make your team work more efficiently together. Now let's move on to this automation, the fourth one. When a task is overdue, mark with the tag urgent and add a comment. This task is overdue. Okay, so this is pretty useful in some cases where your tasks are overdue and you want everyone to get an alert. And actually, in a lot of my videos, I recommend not using tags except for these specific cases where it's very high level, global information that needs to be visualized quickly. Whenever something's overdue, whenever something is reopened, whenever you have some critical event happening, you want to have that as a tag. Because if you start using tags for everything, it's going to become a carnival. You're going to have different colors and flags on every task, and you're not going to understand anything anymore. Again, let's get back to ClickUp, and we're just going to create this automation in the roadmap list, for example. I'll click automations here again. In the top right, I'm going to paste my automation name. When the task is overdue, mark as urgent and add this task is overdue. So what this means is that when date is after, and then we can say 1, 2, 3 days after the due date. So we can set a different level of acceptance of our overdue. We want the tasks that are overdue for more than a week to have the alert on. Then please add the tag. So I'm going to search for tag, add tag, and I can just create a tag that says urgent. So urgent tag, and then something else happens. We're going to add a comment. This comment is going to say, hey, assignee. So we can dynamically pick the assignee. This task is urgent. Please complete it. I recommend you to be a little bit smooth, to be a little bit gentle with this. Maybe add more days of acceptation, of tolerance, and maybe make the comment nice. Otherwise, people are going to get alerted for every single urgent task, and they can be a bit overwhelmed and a little bit unmotivated if they start to see all of these comments happening. So I'll click create, and I cannot really show you this one right now because let's say this one has a due date that's overdue. Even if it was reopened, it's actually not going to trigger because it doesn't happen back in time. But if you were to test it out, let's try it on this one and say, okay, I put this one on the 28th, and we are now the 6th of December. It means a week has elapsed. This should have a new tag that happens here that says urgent, and also a comment that based on the assignee, so say the assignee is me, it will say at me or at Ramzi, this task is overdue. And ClickBot will comment out this task and add this tag. That way you can easily visualize all your overdue tags. If I created a filter on the tag overdue or urgent, I could have this show up really quickly in the dashboard. You could actually use it in the everything view if you apply this rule to every single space. So it's really up to you to decide where you want this rule to apply, but I feel like it's a useful rule and I actually use it in my own personal workspace. Now we're going to create a second type of alert, and this one says when the task is reopened, then add the label reopened. So it's a little bit of the same principle, and this one I can demo it to you. So we're going to reopen this task just for the sake of the example, and we're going to create our automation here at the roadmap level, doesn't matter. Add an automation. Again, I'm going to paste the rule, and here I'm going to say when a task is reopened, add the label reopened. So whenever the status changes from closed to anything else, really, so then add the tag reopened. And if you want to throttle this by not creating a loop, you could actually say tag is not any off and pick reopened. So that way tasks that already have been reopened doesn't have reopen being added again to them, and this wouldn't trigger a second automation. That doesn't make any sense. So in order not to create a loop, sometimes you have to add a second condition right here just to make sure your automation works. So this is a little bit more advanced. So if you're interested and need advice on automations, you can book a coaching call with me and I can help you out on how to set up these ClickUp automations for your workspace. So I'll click create and let's try this one out. So if we go and close this task, for example, and just decide to reopen it for some reason, it will add the tag reopened. So I'll do it for a few of those. I'll open this one, close this one. Let's resolve them and actually reopen it, reopen it, reopen it. As you see, as I'm reopening my tasks, what happens is it's adding the reopened tag. Each time a task moves from done to reopened, it will have this reopened tag. You can do one last try. Maybe this one, create goodbye screen. It's closed. Oh, but we are reopening it actually for some reason. Move it back to open, for example. And again, I open up the task. It will have ClickUp take care of adding the tag reopened. And you might understand if you're starting to use dashboards or filtered views on ClickUps that you can use these automations and these tags to alert you on what's been reopened, what's been urgent, what's moving past the deadline. And now we're going to move on to a few automations that are even more advanced, track team performance, for example. So let's have a look at more advanced ClickUp automations. These ones are what I call pro automations. So pro automations are automations that require you to really grasp and understand how this automation feature works and all the conditions and how you can combine it with custom fields. And now that you've got the basics, we're going to create a 6 automation that's pretty powerful. And whenever a task changes to validation, moves it to a manager accessible list. What does that mean? So if you get here into ClickUp, for now at least, you cannot really have specific members change the status from validated to closed. And maybe you want only managers to be able to do that. If we get into these bugs list, for example, if it's in review and you don't want an actual developer to be able to push it to validated, and ClickUp lets you do anything with statuses. As long as you have full access to a list, ClickUp lets you do anything with statuses, at least for now. But there's a way to circumvent this. It's to create a second list called the bug validation, for example. So it's a bug validation list, and to give access only to limited people to that list. So for example, only I have access, and maybe you can have developers have view only access, for example, so that they can see the task, but they cannot modify them. And what you will say is that whenever a task moves to the status review, for example, it moves to the bugs validation list. So same principle, we're going to get here, add an automation and name it and say whenever status changes to a review and it's a task, not a task or subtask, then please move the task to the list bug validation. And you could even say change the assignee to the manager, for example, and click create. So what this means is that whenever the task moves to, say, review, this one, the button doesn't work, it's not going to stay here. And not every developer is going to be able to modify it because it's going to move and appear right here. So as you can see, it's disappeared from here and it's appeared in the bug validation list. So only I can change the status because now it's in a separate list. And that's quite powerful for workflows and specific validations by certain people. So when a team asks me, how can we let specific people modify certain status? I actually advise them for this solution. And on top of that, you also have to create some other throttles, like for example, not letting anyone in the bugs list move from review to validated. Then please move it back to review and push it to the bug validation list. That way you can kind of like enforce everyone to move it to review and avoid the cases where someone moves it to close directly. So it can start to become quite hard to conceptualize as you get to go with ClickUp, but that's why I'm here. That's why I can help you on setting up some advanced, some professional ClickUp automations. Now let's move on to the last automation that's quite powerful. It's an automation that lets you track when time exceeds an estimate. So whenever the task is over budget, meaning the time spent on the task is higher than the time estimate, it's going to notify the manager and it's going to add a tag that says over budget. So let's see how this looks. I am going back to ClickUp, and here I'm going to add the time estimate and the time spent type of fields. I've added a bunch of tasks and I'm keeping only essential fields. So here we have the time tracked, and I can also add the actual time estimate, and I will add a formula custom field. So this formula is going to be a time difference between the time estimate and the time tracked. So all you have to do is click into the formulas and set up your formula to time estimate minus time tracked. What that means is that if I have 4 hours planned on this task, maybe 3 hours on this one and 2 hours on this one, and this one actually I've spent 2 hours so far, I only have 2 hours left. Whereas this one I've spent 10 hours, so I'm in the negative. I've spent more time than planned, and this is bad. I want a tag that says over budget. I want to get alerted on these cases. So if you want that, if you want to automate that, all you have to do is say, whenever someone changes the time tracked and I go into the negative, so I've spent more time than planned, then please add the tag over budget. Pretty simple to understand, and you will see pretty simple to set up as well. So we're going to go into add automation, and again, add our automation rule. And this time we're going to say, whenever a time spent on a task, so time tracked, is changed, and our custom field, the time difference, is less than 0, so whenever it goes into the negative, then please add the tag that we added, change tags, add tag, and we're going to pick this tag called over budget. And then you can also say, add a comment. I'm going to mention the manager, for example, and say, this is over budget, and add an exclamation mark, for example. I'll click create, and let's have a look and see how this works. This is not going to work back in time. Again, automations only apply on triggers that are in the future. I'm going to add a few hours to this task. So I'll add 10 hours, and this should put our task over budget by 8 hours. I've added my time tracked. The trigger has happened, and oops, we're in -8 hours. So let's open up this task, and what happens is it says over budget, and this is over budget. So it alerts you on whatever's over budget, and you can actually use that tag as a filter again and see all your tasks that are over budget because time tracked is higher than time estimates. So this shows you the power of ClickUp automations and how you can combine them with custom fields, with formulas to create really, really powerful workflows. Now, let me show you one last bonus automation. And this one is an automation that I actually used to do with a tool called make.com, and it automatically archives your tasks after a few days. So say after 365 days. And there's a video that I've created on this actual case. It requires a very complex workflow and for you to understand no code and make automation. And now ClickUp lets you do almost this. I'm saying almost, and you're going to see why. But there's a new trigger that's super interesting for this specific case. Let's get back to ClickUp. I'll go into our space, automations, and create a new automation again. I'll just paste the name. And this trigger says that whenever date is after the due date, and we can say maybe 365 days after. And I'm saying almost because in some specific cases, then archive our task. But here's the thing, we need to make sure that our due date is 365 days after our task is closed, but that our task is actually closed. So we need to make sure that a second criteria is respected. The current date is 90 days, for example, after our close date. So it actually has a close date. And this is not a task that has been delayed and has been closed very recently. Otherwise, this would trigger the automation. Even if we have a task that is due a year ago and we closed it right now, it will trigger the automation. So we want to have that throttle that says the close date is actually pretty old as well. So this will cover most cases, but in some very specific cases where you have due dates that are far back and the close date is maybe further back. So in some very specific overlaps, it's not going to archive the tasks, but in most cases it will work. And you actually don't need to use a very complex tool anymore to set this kind of automation. So I'll click create, and I can't show you that one, unfortunately, because we actually have to wait that year of passing by for a due date. But this shows you the power of ClickUp automations and what you can do with it and how it can help you speed up your workflow and avoid you having to do all these manual clicks for things that you repeat again and again. Now, obviously, what I advise is to first think what automations are useful for me, inspire yourself for whatever I've done. You can set up some of those. And once you've strategized, you can create a whole bunch of automations in the right levels. Again, space, folder, or list. If you need more help with setting up ClickUp automations or even setting up external automations, because you can set up triggers with webhooks and go really, really far into connecting ClickUp within itself or with other tools, then please book a discovery call or book a coaching call with me where we'll tackle specific topics on ClickUp automations. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.